So the protests that have been going on in France for quite some time now, pretty interesting. The firefighters have been joining in these protests and these clashes against the police and law enforcement in France. And some of them have actually lit themselves on fire, some of these firefighters, during these protests. Let's check out this video and then we'll look at this article too. It's pretty interesting. Hurry up.
Unaware of nearby predators, the zebra starts.
Let's add. So yeah, pretty interesting what's going on in France right now. These protests have been going on for more than a year. And let's check out this video. See the firefighters there getting beat with these nightsticks, indiscriminately basically, and they don't have any weapons. Look at it's a little fire truck. But just marching peacefully. So that's just pretty interesting. Let me stop this video. Pretty interesting. Just these protests in general, and that they're being joined by the firefighters. The firefighters are going up against police, against law enforcement in France, and it's just hard for me to envision something like that happening in the United States. Just the fact that these protests have been going on for over a year, and originally these yellow vest protests started as because people were pissed off about the fuel tax that the Macron government was going to levy, which would affect, working people most negatively, obviously. Let's see. Earlier, riot cops fired water cannons at hundreds of fire heroes. I like how they frame that, as they massed in the French capital for the high-profile demonstrations. Look at that picture. Wow. Streets of Paris. Some of the emergency workers gathered in the Place de la République even set fire to uniforms they were wearing to bring attention to their ongoing plight. Unions are calling for a pay raise of 25%, arguing their already dangerous work is being made increasingly difficult due to staff cuts and attacks against them. And I've heard about both of those reasons for why they're marching and protesting, and the attacks against them. I guess I heard something that basically people would call either police or call 911 basically for emergency help, and then it's basically setting people up to being attacked. So that's what they're referencing with being attacked. And I mean, the job's already dangerous enough, having to fight fires and save people from car wrecks, and all of these, provide emergency services, all of these different things that are inherently dangerous and stressful and just inherent within the profession. And then you have that going on top of that, and then the staff cuts. I mean, that's horrible working conditions. And it basically, those firefighters got to a tipping point saying, fuck it, I mean, we're getting killed out here, and we're not getting paid adequately for it. There's not enough of us. Fuck it, we need to get in the streets. We need to confront the establishment, the powers that be, and demand change. And that's what they're doing. And it's really powerful to see the lengths that the people in France and these public service workers are willing to go to fight and advocate for the change that they see that they most desperately need and deserve. Let's see. However, when some protesters tried to tear down a fence near the nation area of the city, riot cops turned their water cannons on them. One witness said, although the firefighters were militant, the fighting on both sides soon got very ugly. Today's violence came just 3 months after riot cops and firefighters were involved in shocking clashes on the streets of Paris. Footage showed screaming protesters carrying banners, forcing back baton-wielding cops. There's a picture. Unions say their dangerous job is suffering because of job cuts. A hazard bonus given to all French firefighters has not changed since 1990. That is nuts. Over 30 years, like they haven't, their hazard bonus has not increased. And again, this can all be traced back to, neoliberalism, the further privatization of economies, the further austerity measures. It's basically, everybody at the top through neoliberalism has done very well. Like in the United States, for example, since the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, the top 1% have gained 93% of the wealth in this country, while wages have remained stagnant for everybody else. We haven't had an increase in the minimum wage, all the while there's more billionaires in the United States than there ever has been. And, these protests in France are a direct pushback against the further neoliberalization, the further privatization and austerization. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to make it be one if it's not, of the French economy and the French populace. At least a decent segment of it has had enough of it, and their quality of life has been declining. Their benefits have been cut. Their pensions have been cut, and it broke a tipping point, and they've been out in the streets for months, over a year, doing this. One shielding police officer was seen spraying CS gas directly into the faces of the firefighters as they try and force their way through a police barrier. Bricks, lumps of wood, and fists were thrown as the clashes turned increasingly violent. Other clips showed running battles through the historic streets of Paris as tear gas canisters rained down on those below them. I mean, that's just how, just powerful that is. Like, people running down these historic streets of Paris protesting, and these clashes with protesters and police, with firefighters and police, in this just very iconic and world famous city and setting. On Sunday, it was reported riot-stricken France ordered the immediate withdrawal of a police tear gas grenade that has caused multiple injuries, including anti-government protesters having their fingers blown off. Jesus. Interior Minister Christophe Castaner said the controversial GLI F4, which is described a weapon of war in field manuals, would no longer be issued to law and order officials. Like, yes, it was described in field manuals as a weapon of war. I don't think you need to be deploying that against protesters on the street. But I mean, I just think if something like this was going on in the United States, there would have been people shot and killed at this point. especially if there were, communities of color involved in the protest, because we see how, the U.S. government and law enforcement usually handles, when confrontations with people of color, they end up getting shot or mistreated in a very, very bad way, and just doesn't appear quite as bad in France as it is in the United States, at least at first glance. Let's see. There have been continual disturbances on the streets of major French cities, including Paris, for more than a year, like I was saying earlier, as thousands protest against Emmanuel Macron's government. The latest demonstrations are against pension reforms, but the Yellow Vest movement has also been consistently on the streets since November 2018. So again, against pension reform, so that's meaning either cutting benefits, maybe cutting cost of living increases, something like that, or maybe some type of privatization. And again, it's never the wealthy or the big corporations that really are punished or made to suffer under governmental policies or regulations under a neoliberal kind of governing ideology. They're always, the last on the chopping block, and more often than not, they get all of the benefits when while everybody else is suffering, and that's kind of looks like what's going on in France, and they're just fed up with the Macron government trying to shaft the working people and fuck with their pensions, fuck with their retirement, something that they earned and need to survive and have a decent way of life in retirement. Named after their distinctive fluorescent motoring jackets, the vests started out protesting against rising fuel prices, but now want a reform of the entire Fifth Republic. So basically, it started off with the fuel price hikes, and then it's, the firefighters protesting, not getting a hazard pay increase since 1990, the pension reforms, and just it's just general lack of just the general kind of sense of austerity that's pervading the country, and people are fighting back against that, as they should, in solidarity with them. Look at that. It's pretty awesome. The Statue of the Republic triumph. French firefighters face off with riot police. Pretty interesting. And then I just wanted to show this other video because I thought it showed some other different things. Let's check it out. Fireworks is the point. And look at this fucker just going in there kicking people. And then they're just beating them with billy clubs. Look at that. That shit would hurt. Damn, look at that, dude. It hit him in the head. And that when he got hit in the leg, that would fuck you up. Jesus. Alright, we saw that part earlier. So it's pretty interesting. So it shows that these protests have been going on for so long, and to a certain extent, at least compared to a U.S. context, the law enforcement, the police there have showed a lot more restraint, like I said, than they would in the United States. And I feel like one of the reasons that Macron and the French government hasn't been able to react in a very authoritarian and aggressive reactionary way towards these protesters is because they, have the will and the sentiment and public support on their side, and it's a very, political hot button issue. So the French government isn't really able to sweep it under the rug and just brutally repress it like the U.S. government did when they, from the federal level, had that coordinated effort to totally disrupt and destroy the Occupy Wall Street movement that arose after the 2008 and 2009 financial collapse. And but in France, there's firefighters out there. There's just regular, I don't know, citizens. So it just seems like they have the political or social capital, something like that, that enables them to go out there on the streets, clash with the police. This has been going on again for over a year, and the French government hasn't reacted and just cracked on totally. But it does seem like it's maybe just going to keep continuing to happen until Macron is basically forced to capitulate to the protesters' demands, because it doesn't really seem like they're stopping, or he's just going, because basically when a protest movement happens, there's obviously three things that could happen in vis-a-vis a governmental response. They could ignore it, and which would usually happen if the group that's protesting doesn't really have any type of institutional power or backing. So they could ignore it, which to a certain extent it kind of seems like they've done with this, but they're also sending the police out there to confront them, and they are letting them protest. So not ignoring it completely, but not, the second option, which they aren't doing, is, addressing the issue, kind of taking the grievances to heart, because obviously these protests are still going on. So the changes that the protesters have been wanting the government to make haven't happened, at least completely yet. And then the third option, which the French government hasn't employed yet either, because again, this particular group or combination of groups of people that have been protesting represent certain kind of privileged or powerful groups within the French society, giving them more kind of political or social clout, making it harder for the government to crack down on them in a very authoritarian way, at least, in a kind of outright sense. So pretty interesting what's going on in France. Definitely, like I said, all solidarity with the French, working people. I understand the, horrible problems that come with a neoliberalist ideology, and when that's implemented into a policy set, it's obviously very detrimental to the working people of the country and of the world. And we need to move away from that and adopt a more humane economic system and ideology, one that puts people above profit, makes sure that everybody's entitled to a good, decent way of life, including things like healthcare, education, housing, clean environment, clean water, good infrastructure, things like that. So all solidarity with the yellow vests and all the protesters there, and keep up the pressure, and don't let Macron off the hook for trying to, again, shaft the working people. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Share them in the comment sections down below. Peace. Much love.